Welcome to all 37 of my subscribers, and welcome to my kitchen, one of my favorite, if not my favorite place in our whole house. My name is Jenna, I'm 23, and I love watching people do stuff in their kitchen. I have learned almost entirely how to cook from scratch and live a healthier life through following people on YouTube and watching them do their daily tasks. One thing I always wish I saw in these types of videos, though, was a single woman or a married woman with no children doing these kinds of things. I've been married for just about a year now, but before that, I did things very similarly. I didn't cook a whole lot while my husband and I were dating and engaged because my amazing mother-in-law fed me almost every dinner for those 14 months, but I only saw moms doing this kind of thing on YouTube. Growing up, my mom was so amazing, but she didn't make a whole lot of food from scratch. I think mostly because my parents could afford nicer, cleaner, more expensive foods from the store, but like I said, I am newly married and thus do not have a lot of money. This whole health journey really started for me when I was 18. I'm going to make another video about this, but when I was 18, I was diagnosed with stage 4 endometriosis, which is a disease, or I guess not really a disease, but just something that commonly causes infertility in women. Of course, my doctor prescribed me birth control, which I went on for 2 months, but thankfully the Lord led me to get off of that. After I got off the birth control, I talked to my friends and family about how there must be another way to cure this sickness and not be dependent on medicine. My roommate told me about a podcast called Freely Rooted that talked about how one of the hosts of the podcast had healed her endometriosis by living a healthier life. Long story short, I was hooked. Even though this kind of clean living is becoming more popular, it still isn't super well known and definitely does not seem easy. That's why I hope that through me making more of these videos, I can show you what I've learned so far. My goal through this kind of video is not to guilt you or make you feel stupid, but rather to encourage you that it really doesn't have to be that hard. I am not type A, and if something takes me too long or is too hard, it's not sustainable for me to keep doing. That's why I'm excited to share some simple, practical tips that my husband and I use for cooking and eating healthier while balancing full-time jobs and just having busy lives. I know you're probably juggling all of this, if not more than me, so I hope this is encouraging and will help. The first thing I'm going to show you is me making some pickles. I really want to preserve the harvest from our garden as much as I can, so I am going to lacto ferment these. That means that I'm going to be using only salt and water and thyme to make these cucumbers into pickles. Normal pickles that you buy off the shelf at a store are made with vinegar. Lacto-fermented pickles are super easy and a lot more gut healthy for you since they naturally ferment and get all that good bacteria in them. I've tried making these before and failed, so I'm trying again. I added some dried dill in these, but soon after I did that, I remembered that last time I made these pickles, they molded because I left some dill outside of the brine. So you really want to make sure that everything is covered with that salt and water mixture. I'm cutting these into spears, and then I'm going to get some water simmering and add in about 2 tablespoons of quality salt and let that salt dissolve. I'm using Redmond Real Salt, and I'm roughly using Farmhouse on Boone's recipe. I put some frozen garlic in the jar, but you can do fresh garlic. And then I stuff the cucumbers in there. I'm going to add some room temperature water to the warm salt water. I'm gonna let that cool down a little in the fridge, and once it has cooled, I go ahead and just dump that brine in there. I put a glass weight on top to make sure that nothing comes above the brine and molds, as I mentioned happened to me before, and I also put a little silicone burping cover on it. This allows any gas to escape so the jar doesn't explode from too much pressure while fermenting. That's basically it with these. I'll check back in about 4 to 7 days to give them a taste, and hopefully these don't mold this time. Another thing I always have on hand and is super easy to make is discard sourdough pizza dough. This is kind of what my sourdough starter looks like right now. I haven't fed it for like 3 days. It's really warm outside right now because it's summer, and even though it doesn't look super bubbly, you can go ahead and still use it and make really great pizza dough. You could make this recipe even healthier by using a different kind of flour like einkorn or adding some whole wheat, and I did add a little bit of whole wheat into this, but we've really been liking more of a plain, normal white flour taste for our pizza dough. I'm using Little Spoon Farms sourdough pizza recipe, and then I'm going to put in my sourdough starter, Add some water, add the olive oil, add the salt, add the flour. You could probably find technical sourdough people talk about how you should do it in a certain order and you shouldn't add the salt now or whatever, you should wait. I don't have time for that. I just want to throw everything in the bowl, mix it up, and then leave it there. I'm adding filtered water, and I always use filtered water for my sourdough. We don't usually drink tap water, but tap water also has some things that could maybe make your sourdough not turn out very well because it has things like chlorine in it, and that can interact negatively with the yeast, the natural yeast that you're collecting from the air with your sourdough. I almost always use a scale for my sourdough just because it's so much easier to throw all the ingredients in there and then let it be and not deal with measurements and all that. It's just a lot easier for me. Once I have everything in my bowl, I'm going to mix it up with my dough, whatever the thingy it's called. I can't remember. It's the fancy one that you see on Instagram. It's all trendy. But I'm just going to mix it up till it's pretty much incorporated. And then I'll usually get my hand wet because you always want to have your hand wet when you're working with dough or else you're going to waste a bunch of dough by getting stuck on your fingers. So go ahead and get your hand wet, and then I'm just going to kind of flip it a few times and fold it over itself and get it into a nicer ball shape. As you can see here, when I pick it up, it basically just falls apart in my hand. And the longer that we let it sit, the more dough-like it'll become, and it'll become stronger, and you'll be able to work with it a lot easier. After I'm done with that, I'm gonna put my wet towel on top and just push it to my counter, to the back of my counter, and let it sit. I think today I let it sit for about an hour before I went and I did some more stretch and folds. I'm coming back here to my dough, and as you can see, when I lift up on it, it doesn't just fall apart, and it's so much stronger. This is really what you want to be looking for when you're working with almost any dough, is that it's strong and it holds together when you're kneading it. And I'm not necessarily going to be kneading it, which is what's so easy about this recipe, is that you really just let it sit on your counter after you mix it. I am just folding it into a prettier ball just so that it looks nicer, and you don't have to do this, but I just like to do this just to get it looking clean in there. Here I'm adding some einkorn flour back into my countertop flour jars, and we use einkorn not as much for bread, but more so for roux and thickening different sauces and things like that, because einkorn is an ancient grain and it's a lot healthier for you, and it also doesn't have as much gluten in it. And we aren't gluten-free in our house, but I've noticed that my husband has a really sensitive stomach when it comes to gluten, and gluten is just generally an inflammatory thing for your body, and so we do try to avoid it. We definitely do not completely avoid it, but this is just a really easy way for us to still have yummy sauces without going completely gluten-free. I'm gonna get some water in my big pot and start some dinner, and I'm gonna get that boiling on the stove. Something that my mom taught me growing up that I thought was really silly and kind of dumb, but now as an adult I really appreciate, is that you clean as you go. Some things you don't even really need to use soap on, but if you pile everything into the sink, then you might have to wash it because you're getting all the juices and stuff of everything on it. Instead of, I have a jar here that just had salt and water, so I'm literally just gonna rinse it out and then set it out to dry and put it away. I'm not gonna use soap to wash it. Maybe that grosses you out. That's okay. That's just how we do things at our house because I don't wanna do more dishes. But cleaning as you go is super helpful and helps you not be overwhelmed at the end of your meal or whatever task you're doing in the kitchen. I love my pantry. I think it's so beautiful, but I'm just looking in here to grab some einkorn pasta. So that's the same flour I was talking about earlier that has less gluten. And this pasta is a little pricier, but I order it in bulk from Azure Standard, and then I just always have this pasta on hand. I think pasta is such a great thing to always have in your pantry, and it's so easy to whip together. It goes with a lot of different recipes. Here's our beautiful eggs. Right now we're getting eggs from my in-laws. They have chickens in their backyard, and they are so tasty. And really anything that you can get locally and is closer to you is going to be a lot better for you and your family's health. I call my husband in to grate some cheese because that's a deal in our house that he's our cheese grater because it makes me tired. Today for dinner, I'm making one of our favorites. It's so easy. It's a one-pot meal. You literally just throw everything in the pot. It's hamburger helper, but homemade. I'm gonna go ahead and dump the pasta into a strainer in the sink and then get my beef going in that same pot that I just had the noodles in. I'm adding a garlic puck, and I pre-make these in my food processor with some oil, and then I don't have to mince garlic every time I need garlic, which has been a huge lifesaver. I'm also adding some parsley, some onion powder, which I accidentally used too much of, but it still tasted really good, and then some Italian seasonings like oregano and basil. I think I added some red pepper flakes in there just for fun. And then of course I added some more salt. Do not be afraid of salt. I think that the reason that a lot of people don't like their food at home is because they think that salt is bad for them. But if you're using a high quality real salt, like Redmond real salt, that's what we use, then salt is really good for you and your body needs that nutrients. So don't be afraid of salt. We love salt. Just today, my husband was getting made fun of at breakfast by our friends for using too much salt on his food, and I said, that's probably my fault because we love salt. I'm adding my noodles right into the beef once the beef has fully cooked, and then I'm adding, I don't know how much cheese that is, maybe a cup, and I'm just stirring it in there. I'm also using Farmhouse on Boone's recipe for this, except I'm not really following it. Now that I've been cooking more on my own and I've had more experience, I don't usually follow recipes as well, but basically you just throw everything into this pot. I'm gonna crack 2 eggs in here. I'm doing one at a time just so that they don't scramble, and I'm stirring that around until it's incorporated. I think the original recipe calls for some cream, and I totally would have added cream, I just forgot, and it still tasted really good. Here's my second egg, and I'm gonna do the same exact thing, stir them around really quick. And you might be thinking, this really does not look very good. It honestly is not the most beautiful meal, but this tastes so good, and it's so hearty. It fills you up really quickly. It's all homemade, really great ingredients, and I think it will really satiate you, and it will definitely not leave you hungry. With dinner, we always try to have some sort of fruit or vegetable, so today I had some peaches and some peach juice that I got from Azure Standard last month, and that's a super easy thing to literally just throw in a bowl, and there's your communal peaches for the dinner table. Well, dinner is basically ready. I'm just serving it into bowls, and that's basically it for today. I hope that maybe you learned some stuff. Some of this, to some people, might just be basic normal things that they know and they think it's silly that I'm making a video about it. But really, I had to learn all of this, and I think it's a challenge sometimes to learn different tricks unless you learn from someone. So I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.